Okay, good morning, everyone. Atheist, agnostic, skeptic, freethinker, whatever you like to call yourself, you are welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural talked about from the podium. So today's talk is about, partly about a book called Zealot, which is written by Reza Aslan. Are people familiar with that book? The book is about the historical Jesus, and I went to see him here in Seattle, but his talk was really about how a Muslim immigrant came and converted to evangelical Christianity and then back to Islam, and he became a biblical scholar along the way. So it was at the Congregationalist Church in the University District, and there were a lot of really good questions from the audience that were answered at the end. So I always enjoy the congregational churches, and the church members were very thoughtful in their attempt to understand the truth about Jesus. And it got me thinking about, this book got me thinking about how the word truth is very contextual. So people wanted to talk about things like, was Jesus a socialist? Did he see himself as the savior of mankind? Does Jesus require anything from us today? And you can see sort of the progression towards more abstract ways of thinking about Jesus. So the paradigm for church folk is that the truth of Jesus is that he is God, or at least that's what I think a lot of people there believe. And this is something, Aslan's perspective is something that religious scholars have known for centuries. So there are many books that are devoted to this topic of how did the person Jesus become the Jesus that people believe in today. The one who is God and who cares about and involves themselves in the lives of people who live thousands of years later. So, to summarize a few points, a few years after the Jewish rebellion, then it was 70 CE, Rome massacred every man, woman, and child in Jerusalem and set fire to the Temple Mount and all the meadows and farms and groves surrounding Jerusalem, so that when the deed was complete, there was no evidence that Jerusalem had ever existed. The Jews were so traumatized by this event that they stopped calling for an earthly kingdom and began to focus on a heavenly kingdom. That and Paul, who had never even known the earthly Jesus, but claimed to speak with the risen Jesus, began to promote the risen Jesus to a wider Greek audience. Aslan received a BA in religion from Santa Clara University, and he says it was the Jesuits there who invited him to revisit Islam. He got an MTS in theology from Harvard, Master in Theological Studies, and a PhD from the University of California at Santa Barbara in sociology, where he did most of his coursework in religious studies. And like every book about Jesus, some scholars disagree about some of his interpretation of the historical context and significance of Jesus. But what he says comes down to this: Jesus and his brother James were Jewish nationalists who sought to end the Roman occupation of Judea. Jesus was a committed Jew preaching to Jews whom he expected to remain Jewish. Reza Aslan says, if this book threatens your faith, then your faith is not built on a rock, it's built on sand. But the historical Jesus requires no faith. Aslan says that the more he learned about the Jewish peasant who challenged the rule of the most powerful empire the world has ever known, the more real he became, more than the unearthly being that he had been introduced to before. My response is, that's because the historical Jesus is more real than the Jesus you were introduced to in church. But I'd like for us to think of these concepts. What is real? What is true? Atheists are often accused of being too literal and missing the deeper meaning of things. So that's what I want to talk about a little. It isn't that faith isn't concerned with truth. It's that it defines truth differently from those without faith do. The definition of truth from 4 BC to 33 AD is different from the way people thought about truth in the 18th century, and it is different from the way we think about truth in the 20th century. Allow me a 2-minute detour. We have several ways that we think of truth. After the 18th century, we could define truth as analytic or synthetic. Analytic truths are true across all possible worlds. They are necessarily true, such as a bachelor is an unmarried man, or 2 halves make a whole, and it is inconceivable that the thing could be false. Synthetic truths are truths that you know through experience, but that you can imagine going to another possible world where that thing is not true. Examples of this are girls wear dresses and tables are round. The distinction between analytic and synthetic truths is one paradigm, and it comes a long time after Jesus' lifetime and death. It's what Hume and Leibniz and Kant accepted, but was later abandoned by W.V. Quine. If you aren't familiar with Quine, according to Wikipedia, a poll conducted among analytic philosophers named Quine is the 5th most important philosopher in the past 2 centuries. And I also saw a talk given by him over 2 decades ago. Quine thought that there was no clear distinction between analytic and synthetic truths. He thought you can always save your theory by reinterpreting the facts. If you have a theory that all lemons are sour and you taste a sweet lemon, you can save your theory by making the lemon a special case. So when we had our talk on leaving liberal Christianity behind, one of the things we noticed was that ministers keep redefining their faith, redefining their interpretation of the Bible to basically help save their faith. Another 20th century philosopher, Thomas Kuhn, said that scientists will do whatever they can to save a current theory. But there comes a point where the evidence against the theory is so massive that the group abandons the theory, and then you have a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift is where a whole new way of thinking about something emerges. For example, in less than 150 years, we've seen children be transformed from chattel to people in their own right. In Seattle Atheist Church, we should also love Kuhn for his important warning that science is also not completely objective, but rather colored by the prejudice of the scientists. Oh, it shouldn't be, but nonetheless, we must be vigilant against it. He wrote, "Science must account for subjective perspectives as well, since all objective conclusions are ultimately founded upon the subjective conditioning worldview of its researchers and participants." So I'd really love to discuss that idea in the future if somebody wants to give a talk on it. But it's ironic that the fundamentalist Christians and Fox News reporters who find the book Zealot so threatening, thinking about the flesh and blood Jesus, of whom we cannot talk in present tense on account of his being dead, who wasn't interested in you, but only in his contemporaries, and who wasn't interested in the life after death, but was a revolutionary politician. This thinking historically about Jesus, that if it became pervasive, could lead to a paradigm shift. Reza Aslan exposes the inconsistencies in the Bible, but he says that exposing inconsistencies as if they have meaning misses the point. So I want to make a distinction here. So for me, as I began to think of the historical Jesus, I began to lose faith in the risen Jesus. Riza, however, although he writes about the historical Jesus, he still thinks of himself as a Christian. But he says he has faith in this historical Jesus. And I'm not really sure what that means, because he doesn't tie it, to, for example, modern day socialism or concern for the poor or anything like that. So I don't really know what Riza means from that. But he exposes inconsistencies in the Bible, as a lot of atheists do, as sort of evidence that this Bible wasn't divinely inspired. And Riza says that completely misses the point, because the people at the time knew that those things were not factually true. Take, for example, the problem of where Jesus was born. It is important because Jesus had to be born in Nazareth to fulfill the prophecies, right, of the lineage of David. But everyone knew that Jesus was from Bethlehem. So Luke solved the problem by writing a story in which he has a census, and he said that Caesar made everyone go to the city of their birth to be registered. So Joseph goes to Nazareth because he's of the lineage of David. But according to Riza, anyone reading that at the time would have known that the idea was preposterous. The whole idea of a census was to tax people based on their possessions. So the census taker would come and count all of your possessions to figure out what tax you should pay. So no one would have thought that you would be expected to travel a long distance with your possessions for a census. Quoting the book, "This is an extremely difficult matter for modern readers of the gospel to grasp. But Luke never meant the story to be understood as historical fact. Luke would have had no idea what the modern world even means when we say the word history. The notion of history as a critical analysis of observable and verifiable events in the past is a product of the modern age. It would have been an altogether foreign concept for the gospel writers, for whom history was not a matter of uncovering facts, but of revealing truths." The readers of Luke's gospel, like most people in the ancient world, did not make a sharp distinction between myth and reality. The two were intimately tied together in spiritual experience. That is to say, they were less interested in what actually happened than what it meant. It would have been perfectly normal, indeed expected, for a writer in the ancient world to tell tales of gods and heroes whose fundamental facts would have been recognizable as false, but whose underlying message would have been seen as true. So this is really interesting to me because it kind of ties back again to that leaving liberal Christianity talk, where liberal Christians continue to define their Christianity in more and more metaphorical terms. Modern people wonder if ancient people didn't really understand that the facts of holding their beliefs were false. Like we think in the old times people believed this stuff. But what does it mean to recognize fundamental facts are false and yet say the deeper meaning is true? In one sense, anyone who continues to have that relationship today with Jesus is engaging in a 2,000-year-old paradigm for truth. Let's take another example. Before the first temple in Jerusalem, the Jews believed there was another earthly dwelling place for God. It was a tent, a portable tent, that they carried with them as they wandered in the desert. And there's a life-size replica of it in Israel, and you can look at pictures of it on Wikipedia. This is the place where God lived. The instructions for building it are found in Exodus and are very detailed, and it is particular items in it sound very beautiful. But inside the tabernacle are various pieces of furniture, including altars, and the Ark of the Covenant. You saw a Hollywood depiction of the Ark of the Covenant in the Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's a wooden box covered in gold and containing the stone tablets inscribed with the Ten Commandments. And also there is Aaron's rod. You remember Aaron's rod from any illustration of Moses. He used it to part the Red Sea. And a pot of manna, the food miraculously supplied by God. On Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement, the high priest would go inside the tent to the presence of God to atone for the sins of the whole nation. He wore a rope around his waist so that just in case God didn't forgive and struck him dead, he could be pulled back out for burial. So did people at the time believe that this was true? Did they believe it to be factually true? And as atheists, we care very much about what's factually true. I think I can, kind of make that blanket statement because it keeps us from deluding ourselves. But I think it is important to capture the importance of believing things that are true in a deeper way than what is strictly factually true. For example, in the way that symbolism in art or pathos in orchestral music is true. And it is valuable for us to move out of logic as the only modality for knowing. But given that Christians make up such a high percentage of the population and that their religion purports to be based on a relationship with Jesus, it is important for everyone to understand the history of the man, Jesus, and the history of his evolution into the mythical Jesus. And it is valuable to try to understand what that means. So I'll close the way I always do, that atheists believe in good because good works in non-mysterious ways.